welcome to everybody. My name's Chris Kirk. I'm director at CJK. It's lovely to see you all this morning to talk about trust mergers. Are we stronger together? And in particular for the smaller trusts and SATs and perhaps maintained schools, when does joining a larger trust make sense? And I'm really delighted to be joined by three guests with me. John Murphy, who is renowned for his education leadership and is also one of our team here at CJK and is our lead on all things educational and strategic. So very good to have John with us. We've also got Jackie Eason, who's a specialist in trust governance and has also been through a merger or two herself, including with her own trust, which she'll share her stories with you later. And we've also got Keith Haseman, who's former chair at Stour Valley Trust and again has first-hand experience of bringing a smaller trust, a much-loved smaller trust, into a very large trust. And he's going to share his stories and experiences with you also. Very briefly about us as hosts for the merger at CJK. We specialize in all things to do with school groups working together. That includes reviewing the strength of them, benchmarking, supporting redesign of operating models. We directly support with this topic in terms of we're helping smaller trusts who are looking to join larger ones, also larger ones who are looking to grow. And we do quite a lot of research as well with the Confederation of School Trusts. We sometimes also work with suppliers. So we've got our finger on the pulse in terms of who's providing finance and HR and MIS systems and how good are they and what do different trusts think about them. So we'll be drawing on a little bit of that background as we go through this presentation. It's also going to be highly discussive, so we'll be pausing at 2 or 3 points to get your input as well. So let me turn to the agenda and what we're going to cover. First of all, we'll talk about the strategic choices that you're probably thinking about, which John will be covering. We'll then talk a little bit about how, if you do decide to merge, how do you do it well, which I'll cover. Then we move on to the role of the trust board with Jackie, and as well as bringing to life her own trust experiences. And then Keith will round it all off with his own case study, an example, and we'll have some further Q&A. I think it's really important to say at the start, some important framing. We don't at CJK hold any particular view on whether joining a trust is the right thing, whether joining a larger trust is the right thing for any organization. It's all about better outcomes at the end of the day, not about organizational structures. So if you've joined this webinar, we're assuming you do want to hear a bit more about joining a larger trust. We really want to focus on growth as a positive value-led choice, rather than something that people end up doing because of some sort of form of financial distress. So it's really about helping boards and leaders think about their options, and joining a larger trust is just one of those options. So we hope you find that helpful. And I'm going to turn over to John now to talk about navigating the future. John.
Good morning, everybody. And I've just flicked through all of the gallery, and I know a number of you. So I just wanted to welcome all of you to this session alongside the other presenters. My name's John Murphy. I used to be the CEO of Oasis Community Learning. So I was responsible and accountable for 54 schools, 34 primaries, 23 secondaries over a period of 10 years. One of the founders of the NIOT, and I'm lucky enough now to work in approximately 141 trusts across a year. So I'm in and out of trusts all the time. So whilst I'm a statistic of one, some of the things we're talking about today very much come from the reality that we're all facing. So I think, as Chris has quite rightly said, we are at an inflection point, I think, in the sector. The sector has grown massively. We know now that the majority of schools in the UK, in England, are academies, and we now make up the majority of the ecosystem. And what we're seeing is a sense of real consolidation. But before I go into that, I just want to say, as we're starting this, that we, as Chris has said, we're going to need your engagement at each part of this, and for you to We want to make it metacognitive. We want to enact some of the thinking. We want you to react to what we're saying as we're going along. And hopefully we can make this the best learning session for everyone who's going through. So if we go to the next slide, please, Chris. So the landscape is maturing and the landscape is consolidating. And it's not a matter of an opinion, it's a matter of fact. What's happening over a period of time is that there is consolidation, there are fewer trusts. And of course, as there are fewer trusts, those trusts are becoming part of larger trusts. And in this webinar today, we're sort of agnostic to this. This is about us doing a webinar for you to think about what's your reality, what's the vision for your trust, what's the strategy that you want to have, and what's the outcomes, and do you have the capacity to get there? So when we're thinking in that way, I want you, as perhaps chairs of trusts or as leaders, anchor your reality right here, right now, and say to yourself, well, where do I want to be and what do I want to become? And sometimes when you're doing that, thinking about what you are now isn't necessarily the organization you're going to become. So there's a matter of real sense of choices now. I think one of the reasons that Chris and I and others have put this on is that there is such a rapid consolidation that we wanted to be able to help think through the rationale behind why these things are happening in the way that they're happening now. So we know that there's increased scrutiny on performance and resilience sustainability. And there's a real logic behind why being part of a bigger trust can be helpful. Chris has already alluded to it in thinking about entitlement for pupils, thinking about sustainability, thinking about the professional pathways for staff, thinking about actually having better leadership capacity to do the job that you want to. But again, what we want to do is present the evidence of what's happened. And if you look at that DFE data source, you can see, for example, that the number of trusts by size has grown over a period of time. But we also are aware that if we think about the financial landscape, I mean, the Creston report last week was really useful. If you haven't seen the Creston benchmarking report, it talked about how schools have created better efficiency over the last year, but in reality, there's going to be no more money in the system over the next 3 years. And with a backdrop then of in terms of declining primary roles, how do we create and become the organization we want to and be sustainable in what we're doing? So let's go to the next slide, Chris. So there's a number of choices to be made, isn't there, in terms of how as organizations we're wanting to be sustainable and we're wanting to fulfill the vision, the mission and the purpose of what we're doing with the children and the communities we serve. So a very clear option might be that you stand alone in what you're doing and you create that capacity and strength by staying really clear within within the location you're serving. It might be that you look to work with other trusts in a more collaborative way and thinking about, well, how do we share some of the service provision for better efficiency? I know a number of trusts are still on that journey of working, of taking over 1 or 2 or 3 additional schools by attracting schools. And I think there's a heightened activity now around mergers with similar sized trusts and looking, and so one trust, for example, might have a very strong primary provision and a weaker secondary. So they might be looking for a partner that's got, therefore, might be weaker primary but stronger secondary. And how can those trusts then collaborate going forward? It might be a simple choice that actually you don't think you've got the capacity, and then you are looking to be acquired by another trust going forward. And you might be here today as a chair or as a leader thinking, I actually haven't made a decision yet, but I'm going to turn up and have a look and see where that might go. But the reasons for the merger set on the PowerPoint there are the ones that are constantly coming through from an evidence base into CJK and in terms of the surveys that we've done. You can see that real sense of financial sustainability from both the Enduro survey and from CST survey. The biggest issue that all leaders are reporting, and this is about 62% of leaders, are absolute strong concerns regarding financial sustainability. And of course, that impacts on all those other areas in terms of our capacity to be able to do the job we want to do for young people. So let's go to the next slide, please, Chris. So when you're thinking about your own organization, I suppose it's asking yourselves those questions. Are you creating the entitlement that you want for your young children? Do you have the capacity to provide the best job for those young people? Do you have the professional pathways that you can attract staff? And finally, are you in a position where you are sustainable? And it's a good opportunity to look at in those three boxes around pupils, staff, and communities. Is do you have the capability to put those things into place within the funding envelope that you've got and with the way in which you've structured your organization? So, with those questions in mind, let's go to the next slide, Chris, please. So, we're going to pause straight away. We said it was going to be a metacognitive. We're going to get your engagement in this process today. So, Chris is just going to lead us through a survey, and we're going to find out what your views are about where you are now and what choices you might be currently making and would want to make going forward. So, Chris, over to you to know to manage this bit.
Great. Thanks, John. So you just need two things here, folks, in order to take part. First of all, if you can find your chat window, which has a picture of a speech bubble, and you should be able to then type things in the chat. And secondly, hopefully you can see on your screen your voting choices. All you need to do is type your choices into the chat, and we'll see what you collectively think. It would be helpful. I know not everybody here is from a trust, and not everybody here is from a small trust. I think there are one or two larger ones as well. I think it'd be helpful if small trusts could dominate the voting here, so we're really getting that sense. And that could be SATs, could be maintained schools, could be small trusts. Some of you I see are finding your chat buttons. Very, very welcome to vote for more than one choice. Some of these are mutually exclusive, I guess, but some of them might be choices that you're seriously considering. And if there's more than one, feel free to vote more than once. And it'll be really, really helpful to sort of get a sense of where the sentiment lies. I'm just going to give you all time to cast your votes. It seems to be beavering away. Give you a couple more minutes. What we'll do once we've got this is see where some of the interest is, and we'll have a chance to just talk about that before we get any further into the detail of joining larger trusts. Okay, the flood of voting has stemmed to a trickle, and so I'm going to just invite us to have a discussion about this. So, John, I'll probably hand back to you to manage that, maybe picking up on some of the higher voted areas and getting some comments. And if we like, we can get people off mute and have some conversations as well based on who's voted for these different options. John, back to you.
Great. I've just been watching people's contributions. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask a few people a few questions. So Rebecca Clark, what are your thoughts?
Hello there. I must confess I'm wearing two hats here. I'm a governance professional in a 12-school multi-academy trust, and I'm also a trustee of a standalone school. My view is that all SATs ought to merge, but I understand that there are still conceptual challenges for those schools who are still SATs. And I think the landscape's changed greatly, and funding certainly is a key driver for us in looking at merge. In my day job as a governance professional, it's a key consideration in looking at other trusts, as well as ensuring that we can continue to be a protected structure for our staff and pupils.
Great, that's really helpful, thank you. And I suppose what it calls into question is what the white paper is going to tell us. Obviously, what's happened is that we've been given an awful lot of information saying that a particular family size, that you'll join a family of schools. And if we know that there are 1,000 SATs across the country, there's going to be an awful lot of activity and some difficult choices to be made for those particular schools. Let's jump to Dean Clark. Are you from the Leo Academy Trust, Dean?
I am, John. Yes, indeed. I guess,
So what's your thoughts on this? And I'm sorry, I'm in a school in Sheffield, and all the electricity's just gone off. So I'm hoping the internet's still on. But
yes.
I am shrouded in the darkness here, and you may have not have heard it, but there's also a musical rehearsal next door. So I'm trying to manage both of those different elements from a normal school setting. So, Dean, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think at Leo we've gone through a period of very slow schools joining us, but we're actually seeing in the last year and even in the future, we're looking at schools looking to join us. Again, I think a lot of it is driven by financial stability, sustainability, but I also think they're looking at increasing the offer they can give to their pupils and their staff. One question I'd like to throw out there, and it's an interesting one we've been discussing for years. In terms of mergers, is there such thing as a merger or is it a takeover? And I think lots, even when we talk to some stats, I think it's very difficult to work out who would pay the bigger part and why people would actually wanting to merge the trusts. Is there fear? And I think some of it goes back to, I guess, boards or governing bodies as well, the fear of what's ahead of them.
I think it's a really good question, Dean, and I suppose that's why I posed the language quite carefully when I said if you want to be acquired. The sense of a merger is actually the creation of a brand new organisation between two parties, where in the majority of the landscape, Dean, what happens is that a trust might acquire another trust. But I know through the webinar today, we're going to be exploring what and how that feels for colleagues who've gone through that process, which hopefully, Dean, for you and for others will be really helpful. And I know in terms of the Leo Trust, how much you've expanded your reach. And of course, every time you take on an individual school, that's quite a big endeavour. And I know from Oasis's point of view, I onboarded 41 schools. Mergers sometimes are much easier. Well, when I say much easier, a much more efficient a process around growth than the individual capture of individual schools, if that's helpful. But I know we're going to, in this webinar today, we're going to cover that in detail, if that's helpful.
Excellent. Thanks, John.
Great. Thanks, John. I think I'll move us on to the next topic. I just wanted to actually, Jill Howell, you've said tantalizingly you're exploring all pros and cons apart from doing nothing. So it'd be interesting just to hear how you're appraising merging with a larger trust against those other options there and what stage you're at with that in the context.
Well, we've got 5 primaries and 2 special schools. And because of the higher needs issues, which I know are common across all areas, we do have a lot of financial pressures. So I think if we just take on 1 or 2 more schools, that's not really going to have a lot of impact. So we are looking at different options, actively looking at collaboration, shared services, promoting what we can offer to other schools. It is difficult to acquire other schools. I think it depends on where you're located, how many mats are there already, and it's about loss of autonomy, isn't it, as well, if you say merge or are taken over. So yeah, we're at a state of flux at the moment.
Great. Okay. Oh, sorry, I say great. That sounds like a very painful place to be. But what I mean is thank you very much for your contribution.
Okay.
And also that that really fits, I suppose, with what we're about to talk about. So moving on from all of the different decisions you might make, and as I say, we don't make any value judgment about that, but the topic of the webinar is thinking about merging into larger trusts. So we're now going to plunge a bit more firmly into that one strategic option amongst the many that you might be thinking about. So at the start of thinking about this, we would advise you taking quite a structured approach to this if you're a smaller trust or a SAT or a maintained school thinking about these options. Keith will really bring this to life later as well. This particular process comes from our own Find a Partner service, which is there to help smaller trusts think about this. But, other frameworks are available. We'll use this one because we're familiar with it. we really think it's important to start with knowing yourself. It's something people often skip over, but actually understanding what your visions are for your students and staff and your communities is really important, because that's your sort of North Star at this point, isn't it? Your board might not be there in the future. It may mean massive change for your senior leadership as well if you're joining a larger trust. But probably what is a bit more immutable is your vision for your students and staff and the communities. Once you've got that, what is it you're looking from a trust that can add to this? If the answer is leave us alone, then, really do question whether joining a trust is for you. If it is leave us alone, then obviously you'll want to find a trust that offers that. But you've just got to question, what is it you want to trust from a trust apart from being left alone? So it may be that that there are areas you want support with a trust that really offers great professional development for your staff, being part of a wider community, bigger opportunities for your students, professional development for your staff. What is it that you're really seeking from a trust? Do you have any red lines? Be hard on yourselves about those, because they'll narrow the number of choices that you've got. But if you do have red lines, be pretty clear about them. Actually, what can you do for another trust? Was it you can offer? What do you bring? Because thinking about that will help you to be a more attractive partner to the community of schools you're thinking about joining, and be really clear on what it is that you can bring. And that can turn into a set of criteria that can help to make that a bit more formal. I'll share those a little bit later. So, okay, you understand yourself, you know what you're looking for. The obvious place to start in terms of partners is some public data. Often people start with who they happen to know in the area, which is fine, but it's surprising how easy it is to miss opportunities by doing that and sort of get some groupthink very quickly without really thinking about who's actually out there. So public data is useful. We draw in, when we're doing this, all the data around educational, financial, Ofsted reports at a school and trust level, so that a SAT or a small trust can really see who's out there, who has presence in the area. And then websites can help with some of the soft facts, but often it's the wider intel that fleshes out the picture. We certainly bring a lot of that, and working with John, but also as a trust in your area, you'll know your local community, or as a SAT or as a maintained school, you'll probably know some of the local community of trusts and schools, and getting to a long list and then refining it. And of course, this is where those criteria that you thought about in advance are really helpful for working out, well, who do we actually want to talk to? And then don't be afraid to get some structured information. Let the trusts know that you're thinking this is something you want to do, and ask them to tell you questions. Often we find that the danger is massive reams of information being asked for the sake of it, which doesn't help inform a decision. By thinking at the start about what you want and your criteria, you can make yourself really focused in what you want to know more about. Is it about their approach to the curriculum and the level of standardization versus flexibility? Is it about their approach to school improvement and how they do that? Is it about the operational services they provide? Is it about the top slice that they require to do that, or whether they gag pool? What the level of reserves are? There'll be all kinds of things that you want to know. Generally, we would then recommend an initial discussion at the level of CEO or chair with that trust. As you get deeper into it, it's really good to connect school leaders to school leaders, because heads will tell you about the reality of being in a trust, which will give you a different picture and a richer picture than just talking to the trust leadership. And then around this point, we, by the way, would recommend some kind of non-disclosure agreement for that first interaction, so you can share, pretty sensitive information. Once you move to what we'd think of as a preferred partner stage, then we'd move to an MOU to develop that further. And there's a question there about a template. We do have a template. You could ask your legal team for one as well, in order to get that. But we're happy to talk to anyone who wants to follow up about our template for that. So in terms of a framework and sort of thinking about those criteria, the bit at the top really, really matters. The value, the culture, the ethos that inform the vision and the strategy. The bits underneath are also really important because they tell you how those areas are being delivered. And when we're working with a trust, we would take some initial criteria and think across all those areas and make sure we've picked up on all the important ones. Now, at the bottom, I've written this phrase, trust dividends. We've done a lot of research on this over the years, and there's a series of dividends that trusts can access, which the research shows are how we can be stronger together. A group of schools can do things together that an individual school couldn't do. We think it's really helpful to ask a trust which of these trust dividends they currently have in action, which are the ones they're developing for the future. Not every trust has to do everything, but what you want is clarity. You don't want kind of bland statements that we get really good outcomes, because our schools are inclusive and strive for a good academic education as well as wider outcomes for society. There's nothing wrong with those, but I've yet to meet a school leader who wouldn't want to do those anyway. So what is it that you can do as a group of schools that the individual schools couldn't do? Therefore, what is it that you would be able to do as a school or a small group of schools joining this trust that you can't do at the moment? And be really focused on that and getting some strong answers backed by evidence of how that's worked. So
can I just jump in, Chris? Can I just jump into what you've just said?
Yeah.
A question that normally pops up for people is, does a bigger trust mean you perform better? And all of the research for the last 15 years about trusts, it isn't the size that matters, but going back to this criteria, it's your capacity to be able to deliver that matters, and whether you have the capacity to be able to create the curriculum entitlement, create the pedagogical approaches, develop your middle leaders, etc. But the question that you have as trust leaders is, do you have the capacity to do these things within the size of the trust that you've got? But there isn't a correlation between performance and size, just to be, if that's helpful in terms of as colleagues are thinking this through this morning. I won't interrupt again, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great, John. It is an important point, and I agree. Do you have the capacity? And also, can you show us proof you are doing these things, or are they just aspirations? If they're aspirations, when will they be implemented and how is an important thing to know. So we would typically then bring all of that together into a set of criteria. And against each of the headings like this, think, well, what are the positive indicators we're looking for, and what would be those red lines or contra indicators? So not just asking for information, but asking for information with a clear idea of what good and bad is going to look like. So what does it look like after that? So we've talked about the sort of first step of that, strategic alignment and feasibility, finding a partner, getting to that MOU and a preferred partner. Then you're into more detailed due diligence, getting more granular information and making sure there's a really strong case for why you would want to do this. That will both inform your decision as a governing body or a trust board. It'll inform the other trust board's decision. It'll also inform the paperwork for DFE approval, which will be required at this point. Then you get into the design and transition planning. If it's a larger group of schools, 4 or 5 joining a group of 10, let's say, that's going to make a significant difference to the model. So you'll need to work that out and work out how staff are going to slot and match. If it's a single school joining a trust of 30, then it's not going to make much difference, frankly, to the shape of the group of 30. But there are some big implications for your staff and their roles and changes. Then you get to go live. Integration could continue. There might be further slotting and matching, further recruitment. There might be further systems integration, further transition and support for the newly joining schools to work in the new way they are, and working then through to make sure that the original benefits that were conceived at the start are actually happening, really listening to communities. We'll talk a lot more about all of that in a second. Some quick hints and tips. First of all, start with why. It's interesting, John shared that survey that we did where we found that everyone starts with the financial reasons for a merger. But to be frank, parents, students, communities, and teachers are not motivated by that. So start with the why that's framed around these kinds of areas, the entitlement to students, the leadership, the sustainability, the staffing capacity. I mentioned also it is all about culture and ethos at the start, and that needs to be aligned. If it's misaligned, no amount of other stuff being good is going to make up for it. And then everything else follows from that through the leadership, the staff focus, the finances, the quality of communication, the quality of due diligence done, bringing in wider stakeholders, making sure there's clarity about outcomes and performance. And important, but sort of at the end of the list, thinking about the logistics and the systems and the way that they're going to be aligned. Those are important, but in a sense, second order. So important to do well once you know that the culture and ethos part of it is going to work well. So another hint and tip: leadership succession, the elephant in the room. Who's going to become the CEO? If it's a merger, then that might be an active discussion. If it's an acquisition, frankly, that probably isn't a discussion in the vast majority of questions. What about the wider executive team within the smaller organization? How are decisions made during transition? Again, if it's relatively equal parties, you may have a joint steering group to make those decisions. If it's a much less equal arrangement, then that might not be a vehicle, but you'll still want to know how decisions are going to be made. And what do you do when there's no obvious natural answer? How are you going to resolve those questions? And always seeking a fair process that also is going to be best for the outcomes for students. So I'm going to turn back to you now and just ask, based on what you've heard so far, and so that Jackie and Keith can really target their presentations to your concerns. What are your where do you have the most concerns and questions from this list? And I'm just going to reactivate our stream alive. Now, in this case, you're not choosing a number. Just type a single word or a couple of words. It's going to appear as a word cloud. So I'd encourage you not to write me whole essays, because the word cloud won't really work very well with that. Try and pick a word. Or if you want a couple of words, maybe hyphenate them so they'll be kept together. It could be things like losing control or leadership roles or communication or capacity or expertise. Let's see how that works. Oh, I'm so sorry. I need to resume interaction. Right. Here you go. You should be able to, I would say we've got, sorry, if autonomy and loss of control, if you wouldn't mind typing those in again. You beat me to it.
You're still seeing the slide rather than Streamlive.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. The Streamlive is working, and you will see it appearing now. So yeah, keep going. Okay. Well, we've definitely got one clear winner from the responses so far, and I'm pleased to see that is the big area of concern, because I totally agree it's at the top of the list. We've also got loss of identity, autonomy, loss of control, loss of ethos, which I suppose you could say are the other side of the same coin, right? If the vision isn't aligned, then those can become real concerns. And then some pieces around stakeholder buy-in and community is coming in as well. So we'll see community delivery. So delivering for the community. Great. Culture mismatch. Yes. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, very interesting. So I'm going to hand over now to Jackie, and clearly those areas around aligned vision, control, culture, autonomy are key on people's minds as we move in to do that. So let me go back to the main presentation, and Jackie, talk to us about the role of the Trust Board, and I will do the slides for you.
Lovely, thank you. So a little bit of background on me. I'm chair of Trust Board of Leading Edge Academies Partnership. We had 6 schools based in Cornwall. And last week or week before last, they transferred into a 30-school trust in Cornwall. So we've just made that decision. We're still live as a Trust Board because we obviously need to wrap up the company. So I'm right there with you if you're considering this. I'm also CST Associate Director of Learning. So I'm speaking very much as a governance head So I'm speaking to you trustees and you executive who are working with trustees. Next slide, please. I raise this because this is our Governing a School Trust publication. And what we've done is we've looked at what are the key elements, and we've listed 20 of them here that we need to see in strong governance. And we've organised them into 4 domains. If you could just do 2 clicks for me, please, Chris, I'm going to bring up my animations. So when we do external reviews of governance, what we find is that it's the area in the red box where we've got most recommendations. So what this is saying to us is that you trust boards, we trust boards, are very good at accountability, very good at receiving assurance for the educational standards within our trusts. We're really good at care and compliance. And that's probably largely because our executive are extraordinarily skilled at providing us with those things. What we are not good at as trust boards is really leading on that culture, really leading on the vision, and really being the strategic leaders who will take time to look forwards, horizon scanning at the risks and opportunities that are available to us within the sector. And that's what we need to do. It's really important that we as trustees take ownership of that, because we are the long-term, stable core stewards of our organisation. I don't know whether we've got maintained schools on this call. I suspect we have, but really thinking about that trust board as the stewards. Let me move forward to the next slide and explain just for a moment about that proprietary mindset against the stewardship mindset. So when I established my first trust, it was back in 2012, we were very proprietary mindset because one of the core reasons for doing it was so we were accountable to ourselves. We had charge of our own schools outside of local authority control. We passionately, as we still do, cared about our schools. What CST are advocating for now is a shift, a cultural shift towards stewardship mindset. And I'm going to dwell on this partly because of what I've heard so far in this webinar. And it's recognising the fact that we as a trust board are merely the custodians of these schools. These schools are going to be around in 2040, 2050 when we are not. So it's really important that we get into that mindset of how do I steer my school into a safe harbour? How do I get it to reside within a trust that has that aligned vision, aligned value? And I was really pleased as well to see that as the core decision maker. But it's shifting that mindset about it's absolutely not about us. It's about making sure that we place our schools in a safe place where that culture and the values and the putting children first and everything is still there with us. And just the note that this has to be led by the trust board because executive leaders have a pecuniary interest in joining or merging with another trust. So we really need to step up. This decision to merge is the most, or join another trust or not, is the largest, most important decision we make. It used to be who we appoint as CEO, but actually it's this decision now that's really big for us. Next slide, please, Chris. So the initial board decision-making process, before I put any of these bullet points up, let me just say, this is a destabilising conversation to have. So we need to really make sure that we get a good balance between our Nolan principles of openness, the board are discussing this, and our principles of confidentiality. Because if you set hairs running, it can really destabilise the leadership of the trust. So we need to make sure that we think very carefully and deal with this very sensitively. So if we can put up the first click. I know Chris has already mentioned that this is the fundamentals of good governance, isn't it? Understanding your current context. So when you're thinking about where does the future of my schools lie, you need to recognise the strengths you're trying to protect. So, for example, if it is your culture that's a strength, you need to make a decision that protects that. You need to be really cognizant of the risks you're trying to control. So why are you making this decision? People don't like change. Change is destabilising. So if you're going to make a massive change decision as a trust board, you need to be really clear about what risks you're mitigating against in making that decision. And finally, you need to be really clear about the opportunities that are available to you. Somebody's already mentioned the different regions we're in. For us as a trust board, growth was not an option because Cornwall is more than 80% academised. I think there's only a couple of secondaries in Cornwall that are not. So we knew growth wasn't an option. We were not going to organically grow. And I noted in your survey, 89% of you are looking to remain within control of your schools, either through collaboration, growth, or merger. Only 7% of you were talking about joining another trust. So I just challenge your thinking, just pause for a moment there about what opportunities are available to you. Because I think in the Creston report last year, 78% of us were looking at growth and only about 28% of us achieved it. So we need to make sure we're being realistic in the opportunities available. If you could do the next click for us, please. So I've shared this paper with you because this paper, I'm going to switch back to leading edge chair now away from CST governance. This paper was critical to our decision-making process. What we did as a board is we met and we said, if we're going to have this discussion, if we're going to move towards joining another trust, it's going to be unpopular with some people. And we need to make sure that we're making this decision on really firm footing and we can communicate that decision to people. So we had our meeting and we produced this document so we could sense check our own decision making. We made sure that we had not missed any options. And if we were deciding not to go for an option, for example, trying to merge with another trust of equal size, we had really clear reasoning as to why we were not looking at that option. We didn't look at national trusts, which is something that I would always advocate that you do. The reason we didn't do that is because we've got some very niche bespoke schools and we needed local knowledge. One of our schools is on the Isles of Scilly. We really needed local knowledge for the sensitivities of that school. The other thing we did is we were really clear on our essential and desirable criteria, because part of this decision making was the due diligence, and we needed to give our exec really clear guardrails as to what the next steps would be. So, for example, we asked them to look at which trusts were available to join, and we said these are the essential and desirable criteria because we recognise it's our decision, so we need you to go and get the information for us to make that decision. Next click, please, Chris. Early engagement with our decision making. So yeah, we own the decision, but we really must work closely with our decision making partners. CEO, let me be really honest about this. As chair, the very first conversation I had was me and the CEO together, before I even brought it to the trust board that we need to have this conversation, because I needed to know her position. She isn't a retiring CEO. I needed to say, these are the risks I'm worried about and I want the board to talk about. How do you feel? And I was so lucky that she was absolutely on the same page as me. She recognised the risks as well. So we were very lucky there, but there's a cautionary note as a board. If you're trying to move in a different direction to the executive, it's hard. The other one-to-one conversation I had was with the regional director to say, we're a successful trust, we're all good schools, but we're looking at moving them into a bigger trust. How do you feel about that? Because I needed to know whether they were going to push back, because the regional director is the ultimate person that ticks the box, aren't they? The only pushback we had were from senior leaders in our trust. Our heads didn't want to change. They like being in my trust. When they read our decision-making paper, they immediately came on board because they could see that we'd really thought about it. If we hadn't produced that paper as a trust board, we would have lost our audience and it would have been more difficult. But they could see we thought about it carefully. I mentioned the diocese because we're a foundation trust, and the diocese are decision-making partners with us. So we needed to make sure that they were on board with the decision as well, and they also had a very key say in which trust our schools went to. So make sure that we keep them involved. And of course, I must talk to you about members. So we had regular meetings with our members. Just to be really clear, the decision as to whether or not you move your schools into a different trust, that decision sits with trustees, but the members are the ultimate stakeholders of the company, so they are the people that will wind up the company eventually. As it comes to it, actually, the trust board will work with our legal team to do that. But you have to keep your members involved. So where does the power sit? What's the power of the members? Because they said to us, what if we don't agree with this? And I said, well, what if you don't agree with it? You need to read our decision-making paper. If you think the trustees are making a terrible mistake, your power is vested in your ability to remove us. But actually, they agreed as well once they'd read the decision-making paper. Share the decision paper from the board. Yeah, I have shared that decision maker, that paper with you. I'll share it again in a moment in the chat. Okay, sorry. Next slide, please. Lovely. Okay, cottage change management theory. I won't talk about this for a long time, but those of you that are familiar with this, I just want to start on the left-hand side and say, where does this sit with board and where does it go to executive? And it was our responsibility to make sure that we did the first 4 steps. So we created the urgency. You know, this is the reason. We formed a powerful coalition by having confidential conversations with core decision makers. We created a vision for change, so we made people excited about it. And then we communicated it really carefully across the organisation. Because we did all those steps well, it enabled our executive team to then move and complete the transition more easily. If we had messed up those first stages, it would have been like swimming upstream in shark-infested waters. I'm conscious of time. On to the next one. I could talk to you about this for hours. Lovely. Okay, if you want to just put all the clicks up on this one, Chris, I think there's 3 clicks. Lovely, brilliant. So once the decision has been made, what's the role of the trust board then? Well, you're obviously going to hand over a lot of the power to the exec, but just protecting your exec from those decisions. Can I just share one little anecdote with you? I was working with a trust once who the CEO was in the room when the trust board made the decision to put their schools into another trust, to merge. And it received challenge from the regional board because they said, yeah, he didn't have a vote, but he was in the room. So just be really careful to put that separation between yourself and the executive in the decision making. Once you've made the decision, you might need to reorganise your whole governance. We stopped having individual education committee, finance committee. We maintained our audit and risk committee because actually we weren't developing new strategies. It was all about the joining the new school. So we just met as a whole trust board more regularly. We met more regularly so we could keep everybody involved. We could continue to monitor the risk. We had really clear oversight of due diligence. And every term, because this took 1.5 years, every term we met to say, is this still the right decision? Have any new factors come to light that we need to take into account? And then it went through, somebody's already mentioned, should I talk to my legal team about this? Absolutely. Just follow the legal advice from that process forwards. And just making sure that you're there as a trust board supporting your executive leaders. Next slide, please. The role of the board. This is a spectrum. We spoke about this in planning this webinar. Next slide, next click as well, please, Chris. That's great. So we're going to go from, when we did it, I had 0 expectations that any of our trustees would join the trust board, other than my foundation trustees and my foundation members, because the trust we were joining was having to change their articles because we have church school, they didn't. Some of you will be thinking, no, actually, I want to go into a blended board, in which case you might be looking at maybe bringing an external consultant in. I know CST provides support for boards doing this, as do CJK. So you might look at actually, how do we build a skills-based board? And that's what my little picture's about, is just for all of us to remember it's not about us. It's never about, can I have a seat on the board? I need a seat on the board. It's always about actually, how do we build the strongest board moving forwards? And the trust we looked at happened to have a superb board. They didn't need a new chair, so why would they destabilise their board? It was the right thing. Openness and honesty from the outset. Really, really important. So don't have expectations that are unrealistic. And the next slide, I won't just do the next click as well. I think I've covered all of those bullet points. The only one I'm going to pull out is applying the Nolan principles, because you could have challenge at any point, and in governance, just go to your Nolan principles and they'll still steer you right in this decision, would be the last thing I would say. That's me being quiet. I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat while Keith talks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. I'm going to hand straight on to Keith, conscious. We've got exactly 10 minutes, Keith, which I think is how long you were expecting. So hopefully we are good for time, and please take it away, Keith, and I will press the slides whenever you ask me to. Oh, you're on mute, Keith. If you hover over the bar, there you go. Got it.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah, nailed it. Thanks, Keith. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Can I have the first slide up then, please? Here we go. I've titled this Preserving Rural Education in Clare in Suffolk, which is in this southwest corner of Suffolk, bordering on Essex and Cambridge, a small rural community which I landed in, having spent 18 years in Europe, as some of you have seen from my LinkedIn profile. I didn't have a background in education. I spent 18, 20 years abroad working in acquisitions, mergers in the financial services industry, which led me to a career in really, I guess, change management would be the best word I could use for it. But the soft skills I brought to bear in this situation in education was that I do have a skill in getting the right people with the right skills around the table and leading them through to successful outcomes in any kind of project management role. So that was the skill I brought to the table and why I got involved in this role in education. I think I'd like to say I think we preserved rural education in Clare on two occasions, one when we founded the school and one when we merged into a larger trust. So we can kind of go on to the second slide, please. Next slide, please, Chris. Back in about 2008-9, this was a middle school which Suffolk County Council was determined to close. In our village, which is only 2,000 people, which was a service hub for about 8 or 9 other villages in the area, would have been where you could imagine what the future of the village would have looked like if we lost our secondary school and the families that go with losing secondary education in our community. So community did not like the idea of losing our secondary school. So a campaign was put together. We built a speculative business case of over 200 pages, which landed on the incoming Tory government's desk on the day they came to power in 2010. And we became one of the first half dozen free schools to be approved under the new government. Next slide, please. Our mission was to preserve high quality secondary education in Clare and the surrounding villages for the long term. That is the issue, is that if you have good quality secondary education, you will attract young families, you will attract housing, you will attract all the vibrancy that makes your community last for for the long term. So that was the mission. And what we then did we opened the school converted it from a middle school to a secondary school, opened in 2011, and recruited all the staff, students, and the new head teacher, who became a CEO in due course. Next slide, please. Over the next 10 years, Clare Primary joined our trust. Both schools became good rated by Ofsted, strong academic results on a par with the national levels and with any of the schools in our catchment area. Our secondary was oversubscribed from 2014 when our first GCSE results were obtained. We had financial reserves. We managed by very careful management, astute financial management, dare I say, to have a surplus in our financial management, and we were fully staffed to the degree that actually we created a culture in our school where even some staff, one member of staff left us on a Friday to join one of our competitors and was back by 4 o'clock on the Monday asking for his job back. That was not unusual in our trust. Happened on a number of occasions. I think we kind of gave people a boomerang with their leaving card because we knew they were going to be coming back. Happened on many occasions. So we created quite a culture in those first 10 years. However, the political push was there. The CST were producing papers, as we all knew, about the changes that were coming from the DFE to move into larger trusts. We were in a small two-school trust in a very rural area, and the options for growth were not great locally, but MATs surrounding us were growing, and the pre-existing schools were growing in our area. So we had an eye on that background, the horizon scanning, as John said earlier. Next slide, please. Click forward, Chris, if you would. So in the early 2020s, we then started having, as part of our regular meetings, we set up strategy groups. And this is where, while we had we didn't unfortunately have all the powerful high-level structures that Chris showed earlier on. These were more whiteboards and flip charts in our strategy groups, where we put together our trustees and our governors. And you have to remember, in a 2,000 population village, we were, some of our members were actually in the local community, were leaders in the community, and they were good friends. So some of our members actually took part in some of this thinking as well in our strategy groups. And we were very, very aware of the governance restrictions and the Nolan principles, of course, but they had good views which they could share within those constraints. So these are the kind of things which we debated in small teams within our strategy groups. We knew we were strong, and there was always the tendency throughout the next couple of years to say we're strong, and why can't we just stay as we are and grow? The whole debate through the next couple of years was, we know we're strong and we've done very well, and it was our hearts were strong, our minds told us we needed to move and consider other options, but it was the heart was winning over the mind. And that was the debate we had for the next 2 to 3 years. This timeline ran for about 18 months or 4 terms as we had our strategy groups. We knew what our strengths were, and we were determined to build on those, but we knew we had vulnerabilities, and we had to rationalize those and set about how we could fix them. If we did make any moves, what were our non-negotiables, and what were we prepared to give up if we made any moves at all? We weren't even sure what those moves might be. This was very fluid, kind of typical workshop stuff. The one stumbling block we had, because we were so small, is what value did we add as a trust? And we asked Clare Primary quite boldly, what do we add value? How do we add value? And how do we deliver it to you? And the answer was not a great deal. In a 2-school trust where the weight is in the secondary school, we didn't add a great deal of value to a primary school, which just happened to be down in the middle of the village. And the big one for us was always, well, if we did move to being part of something else, how do you mitigate for loss of independence? And we spent many hours in these meetings concerned with that loss of independence and how we could mitigate for that. Next slide, please, Chris. What we then, as the board, we forced ourselves to structure these 5 options. And we wrote papers and did pieces of work on each of these. And staying as we are remained the main, stayed the preferred option until we got down to number 5, I have to say. We worked way through each of these, and even when we did get down to number 5, it remained the key focus for a number of our board members. We were doing so well, and we couldn't understand why we would want to give that up. Collaboration was, we tried with a number of schools. We went off and had discussions with them, but it was always collaboration for us in our rural area. There were not many schools who were prepared to collaborate with us. It always seemed to be discussing how we could, whether we could share particular services or share particular back office functions. And it always seemed to be sharing a very small pie, and we weren't adding any value to build anything bigger that we could share. So collaboration never really became something that we could build to any scale. We did manage to partner with a MAT and bought, in fact, IT services. That was very successful. We got rid of our own IT infrastructure and bought in IT services, which is a much better partner for us to. They run our IT back office for us, and that worked out to be a very good decision. We did talk to another secondary to see whether they would join us, and we talked to a number of primaries, and we actually got into some quite detailed discussions. But because we run quite a tight ship, we did not have the capacity to add any value to them. So that was our failing there, if we had a failing. It was just there was too much demanded of us to be a receiver of other schools into our trust. So although we tried our best, we couldn't find a successful route into being an acquirer of other schools. So when it came around to merging with another MAT, we had set ourselves out a number of issues that we thought were critical for us, but we needed to understand how we could, the favoured partners, and how we would evaluate them. And that's where, thank you, we phoned our favourite, we phoned Brown Jacobson, who were our favourite lawyers at the time, and they said, I know someone who can help us. That's where we came to Chris. And you've seen these indicators that Chris mentioned earlier on. We engaged with Chris, it was in then March 2023 by now, and we sat down with him and identified each of these in some detail and what we wanted to see under each of these headings. And he's quite right, he's already mentioned, for us, it was vision and strategy was very important to us, the behaviour and attendance and how that was managed, curriculum, flexibility within that, CPD was very important to us. Financial strength, yes, but it was more about whether it was gag pooling or whether it was how reserves were managed, because we had reserves and we wanted to make sure we either spent them before we went in or make sure we could hold on to our reserves should we join another trust. So the way that this worked was we brought in 4 shortlisted multi-academy trusts, which Chris then took on board and looked at the public documents available, which were so the websites, annual reports, any other public documents that he could lay his hands on. And they were then pulled together in you've never seen quite so many A3 spreadsheets against each of these 10 indicators. Having spoken to each of these 4 schools to make sure that, or multi-academy trusts, to ensure they were happy for us to engage with them. He wrote to them and asked them for their policies against each of these headings, and those were analysed to see whether they met up with our expectations and where there were flaws or where there are gaps where we thought we may or may not meet up to our evaluation criteria. And the interesting part for us was when we then had Teams calls with their CEO and their chair of trustees, my CEO, and Chris sat in to facilitate the meetings, and it was very interesting to see whether those CEOs and chairs could actually fill in the blanks in the evaluation criteria. That was very informative because they could not always answer the questions in sufficient detail. So out of that gave us a really sound basis through our own workshops that we'd run. We knew a lot about ourselves, and we now knew a lot about our potential candidates. Next slide, please, Chris. Slide, please, Chris.
Yeah, sorry, Keith.
Sorry. And click. There we go. So the deciding factors for us, and the difference a little bit from, I know Chris and John have been saying this is all about finance for a lot of 62% of trust. That wasn't our case. Critical for us was values, ethos, and vision, and the trust we chose, they were right up there, and they have a similar set of values, ethos, and vision to us. School improvement was our prime need, as was CPD. Those are the 2 things we could not provide for ourselves to a sufficient level. That's what we were looking for. Defence against future financial shocks was certainly a need, and succession planning, because most of my board have been around for the previous 10, 12 years. And that's what we were really needing going forward. Distance was important. We did not want to be with a large trust where their head office was a million miles away, or even tens or 20 miles away. We actually went for a MAT which was Cambridge based, and we look at ourselves as being village college style secondary, and we went with a MAT which has village college style secondary schools in its trust. So my message to you all is not to think of yourselves as being taken over, please. Do not think of yourself, even if you're a small trust and being going into a larger trust where you are not being part of the board and you're losing your trust board, you're not having a place on the board. Do not think of yourselves as being acquired. Think of yourselves, please, as you are choosing your partner. You choose your partner very carefully. They need to be a very good fit for you because you are deciding what the factors are that you need to have in the partner you're choosing. Think of it as a partner you're choosing to merge with, not losing your, you should be regarding yourself as being, you will be a very good fit and bring benefit to your new partner. So think of it as a positive move. On the other side, be prepared for some operational challenges because they will not do things the way you are used to doing it. Then my last slide is, I said I think we saved the school in Clare back when we took it on back in 2011. And I believe by moving, as we did on the 1st of March 2025, Stour Valley did merge with Anglia Learning on that day, transferred our school. None of our board of directors moved into the new trust, moved into Anglia Learning, but we have preserved, they have 18, now 20 schools in their MAT. I believe now we have preserved high quality secondary education for Clare for the longer term. As far as I'm concerned, that is mission accomplished and a job well done.
Okay, many thanks, Keith. Thank you everyone for your participation. Just some further links for you there. We at CJK, as we mentioned, do provide merger services to help you, whether you're a small trust growing or two trusts merging or a larger trust wanting support with growth. We also have provided a document greater than the sum of the parts where trust leaders talk about their experiences of mergers. With CST, we deliver a masterclass in trust mergers, which is starting on the 16th of April. There's also a CST guide to mergers and strategic governance support. And DFE, of course, have material on this too. Thanks a lot to John, who's had to dash to his next session. Also to Jackie and Keith for your participation. Sorry we overran a little, colleagues. Turned out we had a lot more to say than we realized. But it's been great working with you all. If you'd like any help, drop us an email and we will share that MOU with colleagues who would like it. Okay, thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.